I'd like to introduce Claudia Hart, artist, animator, installation creator, professor at SAIC, School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Claudia Hart emerged as part of a generation of 90s intermedia artists in the identity art niche. She still examines identity, but updated through the scrim of technology. Her art is about issues of the body, perception, and nature collapsing into technology and then back again. Hart was an early adopter of virtual imaging, using 3D animation to make media installations and projections. Then later, as they were invented, other forms of virtual reality, augmented reality, and objects using computer-driven production machines, all based on the same computer models. At the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, she developed a pedagogic program based on this concept, Experimental 3D, the first art school curriculum dedicated solely to teaching simulation technologies in an art world context. She lives between New York and Chicago, works with Transfer Gallery and Bitforms Galleries, and is married to Austrian media artist Kurt Hentschlager. This lecture is made possible by the Sylvia and David Steiner speaker series and the Frank-Ratchye Studio for Creative Inquiry, and presented in partnership with the Miller Institute for Contemporary Art. I warmly also encourage you to check out Claudia's virtual reality project, which is opening tomorrow evening at the Miller ICA. They have a show opening tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. called Paradox, The Body in the Age of AI. And that's going to be a great show full of lots of great work, including Claudia's. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Claudia Hart.
Hi. I don't like this. I have a booming voice. Can you hear me? All right, I'll use the mic. All right, I'm now setting the timer. Yeah. Okay, good. And I'm also gonna be in the clock. All right, I'll use it. Of course, it makes it harder to see. I have to get my reading glasses. I'm a storyteller, so I turn everything into a kind of personal anecdote. And so this particular talk is a story about my life and my artistic practice. But I'm an artist who lives their practice, so as filtered through this medium that I use, and the changes in both what the content of what I do, the meaning, and my perceptions about, my ideas about what perception is, as filtered through this kind of technology, simulations technology that I've worked with since the early 90s or mid 90s. So I want to preface this, so I want to be able to look at you, by saying that I have a degree in art history. I never went to art school. And then I went to architecture school, and my area of expertise was the 18th century. So I was actually interested in what they now call media archaeology. And in fact, my partner when I was in school is one of the people who invented that discipline, and his name is Bill Uricchio, and he's the director of MIT Comparative Media. And so we were all working and interested in this period of how, around the point of the invention of photography and how that impacted on culture. That was, so what I was interested in as an art historian was the history of representation. So keep that in mind when I start this story, which is, it makes it hard. Can I move it over here? How's that? No, it's okay, right? Yeah, well, I talk for a living, so it's hard to scare me. All right, so anyway, here we go. So I'm going to tell you this narrative, and I made a Tumblr site that goes with it. Okay, so here we go. So the story begins in 1994. I was an artist, a regular old artist, in the sense that I worked with, I worked in the 90s. It was called intermedia, and we were the first ones that were called intermedia artists. So it was the beginning of installation-based work, and I would show, typically in a show, might consist of a Super 8 movie. That was what there was then. And later I did a little video, and I would have photos and paintings and contraptions and all this kind of stuff. So that was the way I was working. I went off to live, I'm a native New Yorker, and I thought I would never escape. So I went to Berlin and stayed for 10 years. And so That's the beginning of the story. Someone gave me a ticket to Toy Story 1, which was in pre-release at the Berlinale. And I come from a left-wing socialist mother who didn't let me watch TV. So I basically never looked at cartoons or television and had no interest in seeing Toy Story 1, but I had a free ticket, so I went. It blew my mind. And so it was the beginning of this kind of change. I was very fascinated. It seemed to me like a hybrid between, it was very uncanny looking to me. That seemed very strange and extraordinary to most people at the time, just the way it looked. That it was somewhere between a photograph where shadows were cast and there were specular highlights, etc., and a Renaissance painting, meaning a perspective construction. So this is a painting by Masaccio, which I have in here because he was an early artist working with constructed perspective. And this is 1 point perspective. I felt like you could see the mathematics in that, like you could in that. And I was mesmerized, and I wanted to do it. It was something like hit me with a hammer. And I thought, what's that? It was not possible to do it in Berlin at that point. So I thought it was time to go home anyway, so I went to New York, and I started to take a class that was at the Center for Advanced Digital Applications. So it was an effects program that was part of NYU. And this stuff sat on on a Unix. And there was, I don't think there was Maya then, or it might have started around that time. And I started working with that. And I'm showing this basically because, it's funny to look at it. This was I think this thing was 640. It says it's 720, but it was 640 by 480. Normal size was 320 by 240 or something. 640 was considered high def. And what I did with it was that I took a little piece of audio from Blade Runner, which was my favorite film, and I made a little clip going with it. And it was a pop-looking image. And I'm going to show it. It's very short. It probably took me very short. It should loop, but I think that's what happens when you're on. Can I make it loop? It doesn't really matter.
I want more light.
Yeah, we don't have to do it more. All right, the reason why I'm showing that wasn't just because it was early, but it was my strategy and my interest. Like, what I was interested in was appropriating from mass culture and using it in a sort of subversive or irregular way. It was appropriation art, and that was the strategy of most people who worked with media, period, during that time period. So, again, another really early work, billboards, and also, that was the one, I recently was asked to show all this stuff, and I basically, it was a miracle that I could find it on some, hard drive with 100 megabytes on it or whatever. So this was also, and these things were shown in museums, and they were considered very weird. Again, this was in the Speed Museum in Louisville, but again, it was the strategy of appropriation and sort of dealing with pop. I'm very proud because this is like pre-emojis. So I'm a forerunner of, they were happy face. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is the beginning of when it gets dramatic and interesting, because I did that stuff. I immediately followed the trajectory that people used in the regular art world, which was about being sort of pop and ironic and appropriating. I then, right out of that, even though my skills weren't great, started teaching in an art school. Because I had these magical skills and the idea that a contemporary artist, I'd been showing for about 10 or 15 years before that happened. So I was coming from the art world in a feminist context that was very active at that point. You all made it active again, thank you. But at that point, it was very vibrant and active. I'm shouting you out, thank you. So, but I was entering a world that had to do with simulations, culture, research, early VR. It wasn't VR, it was just simulations technologies that had been used in the sciences and by the Department of Defense. At that point, I started teaching at Pratt Institute, and which was a class that was not in the art school. It was teaching production to people who wanted to go make Pixar movies. And this was what was the prize-winning picture, prize-winning at Ars Electronica during that time period. So I saw that, and I was like, what? I mean, didn't win the first prize, but got whatever. And it amazed me that this thing was published, and in the prize-winning documentation at Ars Electronica, they never mentioned what it was, right? This is like a woman with a tailpipe of a motorcycle stuck up her ass, actually. And what they described in the documentation was how the technology worked. Like how how simulations technology functioned and ray tracing and what that was. And there was no mention of the image. So I thought, wow. And with another artist who had worked at Disney Interactive, but they went bankrupt back then, and she got a job teaching at Pratt, we decided to go to war on simulations culture, which at that time was blowing up. It was 911, and what happened was industry put through money, the Department of Defense threw technologies into the gaming industry, which were very nascent at that point. It was tiny. There wasn't a big computer gaming thing for development. So there was the beginning of students who wanted to study gaming, and there was a lot of money being thrown into it, but the culture around it, the teachers, my colleagues, were Department of Defense kind of folks. So Claudia Herbst, it was the two Claudias, and we had this sort of dog and pony show, and we would present, we wrote a paper that was called Virtual Sex. It's still online. We were also inspired by this. I have to show this. So this was Blood Rain. She was on the cover of Playboy at about the same time. Wait, let's see. It seems... So this seems normal. It's very short. Right, that's it. So what happened was, whoa, now it's looping. Sorry. All right, so basically that was normal. She was on the cover of Playboy, and my students, the people who I was teaching who wanted to go in the game business, were very, very interested in doing this. And there were me and Claudia, two women, teaching them. So, and at the same time, because Claudia was young and beautiful, I was, I think, in my late 40s, so they were tormenting her. They actually would, really actually tormenting her. And so we started this program of resistance where we would present papers all over, feminist context or College Art Association. I mean, we did them everywhere. We did this paper called Virtual Sex that's still online, and I still get a lot of hits to that thing. And we talked about the culture of technology and virtual imaging as emerging from monastic, homosocial monastic culture of men who wanted to invent the world outside of women. And so that was the whole premise. I will say then, so my work started evolving in relation to that, and it was at that time I did this piece as a demo in my classes, which were filled with young guys who wanted to do, a woman with, on the motorcycle. Seriously, they would do projects like that to taunt me. So my first practice was really about doing the opposite. Whatever they did, I did the opposite. So I was trying to make it sensual and slow moving and erotic, and that she was sort of pleasuring herself. And I would just do this. I taught myself how to character model. There was no poser. The hands are terrible. But I mean, that was a while ago. And I noticed as I did it that my students got totally freaked out and were really, really anxious and upset. Like they were making the girls on the motorcycle or in the metal bikini like blood rain, and I was just doing that as teaching them how to model. And they would go have anxiety attacks, and I thought, wow, I'm on to something. And that was the beginning of my first body of work when we showed together a bazillion years ago. That was mainly what I was doing. Wait, I hope did I start this? Oh, I gotta go faster. All right, so I consider myself as a student of the 18th century, staging a romantic rebellion. I was like Liberty on the barricades. That's like a famous 18th century. And I was resisting in the same way of dealing with open eroticism, but that was slow and sensual and not pornographic. So that led me into this kind of thing. And so part of my concept was that I was going to propose in my work tropes about the feminine body. So and feminine sensuality and slowness and all of these canons that had to do with femaleness. That included the idea of the goddess and nature. And so I started playing around with clockwork depictions of natural processes. So this was also early. I think it's from 2007. And she's actually moving. So she goes around in a circle like a clock, and she sort of rots as she goes, and roses grow all over her. And wait, let's see how long this is. I'm going to speed it up. And I took crumbling white paper and processed it a little so that it was sort of sounded like leaves. And I was dealing with a kind of classical canon. Actually, this is from a famous movie with Jennifer Beals, which was called something dancing, where she was a porn star and water gets dumped on her. Do you know this movie? Wait. Yes, this is from Flashdance. Yeah. So that was Jennifer Beals, and when she gets the water dumped on her in the end, and she gets accepted to ballet school. So that was, but somehow that was part of it, right? That I turned it into this, and it was this erotic thing, and she was liberating herself and got a free ride to Juilliard as a result. Yeah. So anyway, I did that, and as I was doing it, it made me understand. I got deeper into the software, and you can see by this I also got more skilled. I understood what I was doing, and I understood that I was actually simulating nature in a kind of epistemological way. And that was this giant insight into what simulations was and how it really deeply would affect perception and cultural perceptions and ideas about many things. So I'm going to skip forward. Good. So, a bunch of years ago, I was asked to give a talk at the Art Institute, the museum, on a conference for teachers of grade school. And I was talking about simulations, the paradigm of simulation as a way to teach very young people. And at this point, my understanding of the technology and how it functioned, and Maya actually, led me into this other kind of analysis of what I was doing and what it meant and why it was culturally significant in a way that I think is much more profound than me as an artist ironically riffing off of mass culture. So I started to get a deeper understanding of it, and I discussed, these were my notes from that talk, I discussed the idea of Maya, or all 3D if you'd use Cinema 4D, it doesn't matter, or Blender. I talked about it as an epistemological software, that the software itself, that the interface itself was a taxonomy of the sciences and human understanding about what perception is, how it works, and how the world works. So at the time I did this talk, there were like 6 main interfaces in Maya. Now there's probably 20. But anyway, so here again, you had the interface itself divided up into parts. So the animation interface was actually human and animal anatomy, so it had to do with morphology and analysis of motion. The dynamics interface simulates materials, right, from artificial ones like metal and natural ones like liquids and gases. You could read all that there. But the interesting thing about this stuff is the language in each of these interfaces comes from those hard sciences. So it's very hard to learn if you're just learning this stuff by rote. It's supposed to be the biggest, most complicated softwares ever made. But when I started to teach, and I understood really what was going on here, I talked about it in terms of the study of looking around in nature and looking and using that this language that was used was from the various sciences. Like you could Google stuff and look it up. If you wanted to know numbers about what steel looks like, you have to look up the physical properties of steel and use information that you might find on Google, and you put them into the interface in various slots, and voila, it looks like that. So I found myself teaching things about particle physics, about the physics of materials. Optics is another big one, the qualities of gases, Newtonian physics, and calculus in terms of the modeling interface, geometry, trigonometry, and calculus. The same language is used. And then I want to say now that, I'm going back there, but I teach in an art school, the Art Institute. It's a very big art school, and my students don't necessarily, weren't good in science or technology. But when I started understanding that this was about modeling the real and modeling knowledge and science and the way culture understands real in our epic, and explaining that to my students, they could go to the advanced levels at the end of their first semester, because they understood about the way they could look and see how their bodies worked. They could look out the window and look at nature, observe trees, with their glasses, everything like that. They started to understand it in terms of a kind of summarizing of the real, and as these kind of books about science. And then they became wizards, and they still are wizards. That's why they wanted me to teach the teachers who were teaching grade school students. So I started, this brought me back to what I had originally was about when I studied art history, which was about representation and perception. So this is Dürer's Melancholia. These are the early perspective machines of Dürer. And then also during my early period when I was in school, I actually studied structuralist filmmaking, and that also came back to me at this time. So this is just a little tiny, this is the famous Michael, have to lower it. I'm showing you this, Michael Snow did a famous film. It was like a 24-hour Psycho. It was very, very slow in real time. This is a speeded up one. But the idea, this is meaningless. I just want you to know it's a slow zoom that takes like 8 hours. But this is like somebody did in a minute. Let me stop it. Okay. So I was educated in terms of avant-garde filmmaking also at NYU, and I understood that simulations, things unfold in time. That's how it imitates reality. So the unfolding in time, and creating structures that are imitating nature, that you could speed up, slow down, create clockworks, invert, create paradoxical sort of Rube Goldberg constructions of the real, became my understanding of what was meaningful about all of this. So this one I'm going to just show briefly how I was working with that, and then I want to sort of skip ahead to the VR stuff and the other stuff. But in this one, this was an example. I returned to the theme of the odalisque, which was that lying down one I made to freak out Pratt students. You can't freak out SAIC students. That was like useless. But by the time I got there, I wasn't interested in that anymore. So this one, I set up a kind of clockwork where I took canons of the odalisque, the naked woman. I took about 6 from paintings all made by men over during the Renaissance and after. And then I made 500 frames from pose to pose. And so the camera slid over her, and I called it caress because she was lying on the Madame Récamier, famous 18th century neoclassical painting. I put her on the chaise lounge, removed it, and had her slide from 500. So it was a kind of clockwork where what ended up happening is it's erotic. Oh, I put her body in a box like a coffin and squished it because I thought of her as making this construction like a coffin. So this was also about death, a place where time didn't obey the natural laws in a kind of uncanny time space, in which made her white like a classical sculpture. And my understanding of it was, and I knew it was going to be erotic. And my understanding also of what I was doing at this point was what was also meaningful, in the fascination I felt about 3D when I first saw the Pixar movie, was its uncanniness. And its uncanniness is what also is often called in academia its liminal qualities. So it's a sort of halfway space between aspects that look like photography, that seem to be recording and that actually do mathematically, in a computer model, mimic the real, yet at the same time, you can make the real not obey the rules of time that real has. So it's the worlds that are created for me within this space have to do with things that stand outside of the normal march towards death, the passage of time. Is that you can circle them and make them go faster and slower and everything at different rates. So I started doing that. And this is uncanny. Unheimlich is a Freudian term which means, actually means being both dead and alive at the same time, right? That which is unheimlich was also something that is what Freud talks about, is it has both dead and alive qualities, and that's why you feel you lived it in another life, or you've experienced something you've seen. It's also used, the uncanny, in robotics, right? So we know that the uncanny valley, so as you get closer to real but not real, you have the experience of being what are those things? Zombie, right? And then, as you get closer to having more qualities of lifelikeness, you go into this uncanny space, and then when you get into the hyperreal, then you've made a robot that everyone can love, right? And they use it for research in robotics, the same idea about uncanny, like how much, if it has too little of natural humanness to it, it becomes a monster. So, going back again, where's my escape? Okay. So I did a lot of works related to that, but I'm going to skip ahead because I want to see, because we have 20 minutes. All right, so there were a lot of works dealing with this uncanniness. This was a piece, if we had time, I would show, or maybe I will, because I did it at the Wood Street Gallery in 2010, like a million years ago, in which they were also based on neoclassical cemetery architecture, in which sun rises and sets, and at the same time they age, their bodies bubble, everything collapses, and ivy grows all over them. Nothing really happens in the whole thing. I'm just going to skip ahead. When I did this in 2010, I have to say that at the installation, it was a 5-1-2. Oh, this one only has 4, but there was actually 5 channels. People were coming into the show and saying, like, this is weird, nothing's happening. Like, why are we looking at this? And I think now we're much more acclimatized to looking at this idea that things, because we're adapted to simulations technologies, within gaming, within special effects, within mass culture, the idea that you might stretch out, or even zombies, right? Zombies are we're very well acquainted to zombies and uncanniness. But in 2010, they were like, why are we here? Nothing is happening in this video. And I was very mortified. I'm going to skip ahead. I don't want to keep, I'm sorry. Should I be showing them long? All right, because I want to talk about this too. So at this point, in terms of my understanding of simulations culture, that I understood that we were post-capture, that we were within the cultures of simulation and with the softwares itself, that we were actually modeling the real instead of capturing it. So that notion that you would create a computer model of the real, as opposed to capturing it, like grabbing it, a slice of life, cinema verite, was a kind of radical shift in terms of what might be going on. In 2010, I curated a show with another artist called The Real Fake, So we sort of foreshadowed again, like the discussion of now, because it is a cultural issue that has emerged from the technologies of representation, right? So the fake news and all this stuff that we're talking about directly comes from this simulations culture and the proposition that the real is not captured, it's a parallel world in which that can be manipulated. So Rachel and I, in the end, the show was redone several times. We were given money. We had a website. We updated the website. It's now an archive in which we have about 65 different artists. People use it to curate, and they teach from it. Rachel and I made a manifesto. We're still invited to go around and talk about the manifesto. I just want to stop it for a minute. So one of the things, in fact, I'm going in a couple of weeks to Tel Aviv to present this, is that the idea that the paradigm shift, the passing into the computer model version of reality from the photographic, that we are in a post-photographic culture, and the impacts of which we have seen in the crisis of the social media and the internet and the last election, and we're just sorting it through now. So all of these things got filtered into my practice and into my ideas about what I was doing as I evolved with the practice itself. And the culture shifted and sort of caught up with it. And I think it's profoundly significant in terms of the world as we know it. That's other thing that's important is the Cyborg Manifesto, so the Haraway writings about that affected me when I was making these early works, the idea of nature and simulated epistemological model of sciences merged into one, that it was going to be this sort of cyborg thing, which was also the uncanny thing. And this has also happened, right? As we go around with our cell phone. I mean, this is the reality that we live in. And our job is to process this as artists for the culture. We're the vehicles who might offer the images and the emotional grounding for how to deal with these dramatic changes. So that, I feel, is a lot of my practice. So these are different artists who were within it. I'm going to escape again. Can I? Well, I can't escape. What? Yeah, I'm pressing escape. Oh, there. Okay. All right. I'm not wearing my right gap. Oh, I see, because we're out of the site. I have to go. It skipped us into. So, anyway, wait. Oh, I have to put on my other glasses. See, this is like I'm escaping from the inevitability of death into Maya almost all the time. It's good. The only problem with it is you get horrible diseases from being hunched over the computer. And you're actually like encouraging your body to go to waste. I mean, you're facilitating it. I hope you all realize that. Wait a minute. What?
Missing an eye.
Oh. Blindness is part of it. And like this, right? You go around like these. Okay. Oh, it's. Now I have to add. Okay, good. Thank you. Even with the reading glasses, I can't really see anymore. But I do think it is about the significant space of virtual imaging has to do with this liminality, this halfway space between dead and living. And that is where I went with it. Now I'm zipping through. I'm going to zip past into the performative work and that stuff that's more related to what you could see next door. So what started to interest me was this idea that you could create a kind of liminal metaphysical space where you would be dealing with outside of the pressure of repression of the knowledge of death, meaning like culture, most of the time we block everything, right? We can't deal with bodies, we can't deal with the world, we can't deal with anything. And in my opinion, it has to do with we're very nervous about bodies which are very vulnerable and can die. And part of the fascination of virtual, of simulations, is that you create this liminal halfway space that's sort of real and sort of alive and sort of dead. And that's the magical thing. And that this could be a space for transformation or contemplation or meditation or a lot of things where you can be in your body in another way, which is actually what I think the show is about over there. So I started, again, augmented was invented. Somebody said, can you make a dish? Because they wanted to sell it. It was Michelle Thurst. She said, I'm going to make an online shop. Would you like to make an augmented dish? And I was like, an augmented dish? So here it ended up, I did a project with the New Museum of Many Augmented Dishes. And at that point, so this one, I started working with, so this was referencing Buñuel and early technology and eroticism. It was actually from that first animation I did, which I black and whited, and I put real-time cockroaches on it, so they were like endlessly. And then it was Alice in Wonderland, so it had to do with an inverted logic world. And I did a project with the New Museum where I made a lot of different napkins, placemats. And then I did a project at I-Beam, which was an opera fashion show that was augmented, because I was interested in this possibility of mixing the unreal and the real in this kind of liminal theatrical environment. I'm going to skip ahead. So basically, it was Alice. I started working with Alice in Wonderland, and this was augmented fabrics, augmented costumes made of panels. And I had the audience on stage with tablets, and they were supposed to sit in these little chairs, but they wouldn't do it. They ran around and looked at everything. And the other thing that happened that was interesting, so I was using Alice in Wonderland, and we were moving slowly. It was like a fashion walk. People mobbed the stage. They got so freaked out by this of what was happening with the tablets, and that you could see these things in it. It was very surprising. That's Nayland Blake, who's a very famous performance artist. And well, anyway, I got them to do this, and I didn't understand what would happen. I passed out little binoculars to the audience so they could look, that's me, at what was happening in the tablets on the stage, but instead they broke into the theater and they mobbed the stage and behaved like a lot of this movie is actually at the rehearsal, because they did that, and so that was when I really understood that this read on a very primal level, this idea of virtuality, the halfway liminal space between real and unreal, the promise that you could live outside of the march of time towards the limits of the body, that you could be beyond the limits of the body within this virtual environment. And I think that's why that's its power. It's its power that we have only just begun to explore in terms of making art with it.
And yesterday,
So
things went on just as usual.
This I did in collaboration with Ed Campion, who's the director of CINMAT, the Center for New Music and Audio Technology at Berkeley, who I will say got a giant grant for VR in like hundreds of millions of dollars. And we got a little piece of that, and we're using that to develop multi-track Unity environments with sound. And I'm working on another project. The Flower Matrix was the beginning of that research, and another one with Alice's, where we're mixing a more sophisticated version as I've gone on, which mixes a VR Unity environment in which live musicians, who you could see as avatars also within the Unity environment, who are on stage wearing, of course, jumpsuits covered by augmented reality, on the kind of stuff there with pedestal, set with it. And then we stream some of them from Berkeley, so they're both streamed into avatars. And then I have a motion capture dancer. I'm going to show you, I'm just going to whip through how we have 5 minutes. All right. So then this was the dolls. That was the next phase of creating this kind of liminality in this Alice series. So this was using projection mapping. So I was sort of expanding into the possibilities. So I created, the dancer is wearing a billboard, right? A 3D, a flat thing that I made in 3D and and then mapped the 3D thing onto it, and then fed back live. And Aaron, that's the movie you're showing. It was actually the texture map for the dresses, yeah. So that they're gonna put on the Forbes billboard over at UPenn. So I never showed that by itself. It's supposed to be like this. But I thought it looked good by itself. I'm totally down that you're doing that. Yeah, I want to see. But anyway, again, this was a trance environment where I was using the icons of collapsed empires mixed in with, you see McDonald's. They were one of our sponsors. And they were like, the producers were very scared, but they loved it. And Microsoft and all these things were mixed in with the icons of collapsed empires of history, East, West, and everything. And part of that thing that I began to understand was through manipulating time with these different algorithmic patterns, natural waves in different ways that I sped, slowed, and overlaid, that I could make people go in a trance and hypnotize them. That was part of what you can do when you simulate, right? So I did it both for myself, when people go into these or in something like that, it's very immersive and it's, intense. This is just a little excerpt of a long thing. So this possibility of transformation became part of it. Then I started working with VR. That's Alfredo Salazar-Caro, who did Demodo, who's one of my students. P.S. They're almost all my, when I show that work and all the stuff, there are hundreds of them out there. That's why the world's becoming a better place, because my students are taking it over. Right? I think it's true. But anyway, so this was, so then there was a flower matrix, which is the VR environment. This is just I do lots of things with them, so this is a little excerpt of what is actually a VR environment with Ed's music and Danielle Di Gratola is improvising live. She's going to be one of the people streamed in from Berkeley into an avatar into New York when we're doing a mixed reality with all the different parts to it. And these are obviously icons, emoji, and corporate. Oh no. dialysis from the live performance. The other one. That's at Miller as a VR environment. Yeah, except it's live, so they blow up and they do different things because they're happening in real time. This is a rendered 4K movie. Right. I want to show you one other thing, and then that's the end, because the last part this is the environment I'm working on now. So I actually use motion capture done in Montreal at a big game company that gave it to me for free, 50 camera mocap studio. So I captured a Mexican wrestler who happens to be my trainer, and Christina Isabel, who was the dancer I worked before. They made routines, and I made a kind of hybrid cyborg, half male, half female motion language that moves between wrestling and ballet, and steps when they shift weight from in one avatar. So that was my, again, still thinking about the cyborg and the mixed reality and the morphing between real, unreal, dead, and alive. So I just want to play a little excerpt, because this is I think it's interesting to see there what happens. Questions? Yeah.